Sorry, I don't mean to cut you off. Hello, friends. People joining us from the outside. Welcome to Graffiti Park. If you guys don't know, we're an artist collective out here in Las Vegas. You are in the Ocho, which is our multi-learning, multifaceted utility space. We are blessed to have our co-founder teach our class tonight on resume building and portfolio building as well. So without further ado, this is Daniel Maloney.
Hello, everybody. I just realized it's spelled wrong. So, we're building it either way, even though it's bidly, So again, my name's Dan. Today we're going to be working on resume and portfolio building, despite what that says. We're going to try to keep it short and sweet because that's exactly what your resume should be, is short and sweet. And hopefully we'll cover a few different things today that talk a little bit about what goes into the resume, the kind of philosophy and content side of things. And then we'll talk about, because we're in our collective, as Dan mentioned, we're going to talk about portfolio building and what goes into the differences between the two. And then the mysterious CV that is sometimes asked for, resume/CV, what that is. And then we'll just talk about some general tips, questions, and get from the audience out there to make sure that you walk away with your questions answered. So, jumping right into it, before we break down the three, I want to talk a little bit about the purpose of the three different types of, documents that we're going to be talking about, as well as the difference between those three and how you want to apply them. So the purpose in general is to make a quick lasting impression. So again, whether you're talking your resume or your portfolio, quick and lasting impression. You're basically trying to showcase your skills, your experience, your not so much achievements, we'll get into that a little bit, but basically how you can help or partner with whatever company or entity you're trying to get across. And so again, we'll talk a little bit about it, but you can think about it like, how can I help this company or person or whatever organization, how can I help solve their problems, right? And that's what you want to really be able to articulate when you're talking about your resume, your portfolio, and your CV. The other thing that I want to touch on is everything that I'm talking about today is public knowledge. It's at your disposal. This is stuff I've picked up just along the way in both hiring people and applying for jobs, as well as just Googling tips on a resume, tips on a portfolio. There's a bunch of books, obviously. All of that pretty much boils down to, I've tried to put it together in this presentation today. So again, be your biggest resource. That's my number one tip I can give you, is be your biggest resource and go out there and do the research that you need to do. So again, so jumping into resume. So before we get into the actual tips and some of the things that can help set your resume apart from others, I want to touch on just generally the items to include as far as content goes with your resume. So obviously, first and foremost, you want your name and your contact information. So a good email, a professional email. So if your email is cutieboy123@gmail, you probably want to change that up so it's a little bit more professional looking, and having some sort of phone number or contact information as well. This I want to talk about at the top. There's an idea of, it used to be called like an overview or just like your objective statement, but a lot of hiring managers are looking at looking for a career snapshot, so to speak. So again, what skills do you have? How can you help solve their problems? What are you looking to do with those skills, or have you done already with those skills? Your experience in education, both of those things should be on your resume. But again, depending on what you have more of, that's what you want to prioritize on that top third of your resume. So if you're just coming out of school and you're proud of your degree, you definitely want to have that up there. Maybe you have a couple jobs, but if you've been in the workforce for a little bit and you have a handful of jobs, you want to put those up at the top, and your education can be a little bit further down at the bottom. So again, weigh your experience in education. Both of them should be on there, along with your skills. You want to use like verb items, like I delivered this, we formulated a new plan, or was a project manager that oversaw this, right? So you want to use verbs instead of career or goal-oriented individual. That's awesome to be goal-oriented, I hope you are, but that doesn't really give a hiring manager a whole lot of information about what you can do for them. That's awesome that you can do that, But if you're goal oriented, talk about it in your experience, how you've been able to help other companies achieve their goals or your own goals, right? Again, we'll talk a little bit more about that. So contact info, your career snapshot, very short, up at the top. Opportunity to utilize some keywords and phrases there. I'll talk about that in just a moment. Experience, skills, education, and references. One item that I don't have on here is a photo. So that a lot of times if you Google like resume template, you'll see they have a photo on them. Many of them have a photo on them. It's kind of, again, industry dependent. If it asks for a photo, feel free to include one, but generally a lot of research shows that you shouldn't include one. You're fine to not include that. It's not necessarily relevant information. So diving a little bit deeper into the resume, first and foremost, and this is like, if you take away anything from this, whether it's a resume or portfolio, it should be tailored toward whatever job or role or organization that you're applying for. Yes, you want to have a core template or like a core document of what your resume is to be able to change it and alter it up. But if you're applying for a very specific position, you want to be able to use words and job duties for that role in your resume. Showcase how you've been able to already do those things, how you can take it and further beyond that. One thing I do want to say on that is don't just list job responsibilities. They don't want to just see that you can do the job. Of course, if they're going to hire someone, that's the general expectation. Excuse me, rather you want to show how you can use your experiences, education, and skills to not only do those jobs, but again, take it to the next level. The second point, I mentioned templates. We talked a little bit earlier about AI and how there's a lot of new tools online, especially with the advent of these new resources that you can go on. And basically when it comes down to that, that's fine. You can use that as a base, but the number 2 recommendation is customize your template. When it comes down to hiring managers, and I can throw the link in the study right here if we want to be creditable, but based off of a study that I was looking at, 60% of resumes that were of the hiring pool, those that were customized their resumes were hired at a 60% higher rate than those that just used a general template. So I thought that was an interesting stat to include. But again, feel free to use that as a template, but again, customize, make it your own, especially a lot of our community in the art collective, we're artists. Take some of that flavor to your resume, right? It should be, take it, jump on Canva, get a little exciting there. Don't use more than 2 fonts though. Don't get too exciting because it's good to utilize your white space. Use bullet points on your resume so that you want to drive whoever's going to read that, you want to drive them to the important information you want them to see. So sometimes less is more. You don't necessarily need to include every single thing you've ever done. What is relevant to the job? Again, what is going to make you stand out? And what are the basic requirements that you need to include as well? Short and direct and clear and concise. I guess those are kind of the same bullet point, but don't be verbose. Don't use too many big words thinking that'll make you stand out versus someone else. Describe what you can do or what you've done in the past. Again, using those verbs. What I recommend is use Grammarly, which is another tool that can check your grammar and spelling. Whatever, there's plenty of tools, spell check. If you have Word, whatever it is, I recommend making sure you don't misspell things. That's, again, a very common error that just gets you thrown out right away is if you have poor grammar or misspelling. So those little things will set you apart. Another big thing is the top third of your resume is very important real estate. So hiring managers do not spend a lot of time looking at resumes. A lot of times the first round, it goes through what's called an ATC, applicant tracking system, which is basically a technology software that runs all these resumes, and they're looking for these keywords. And so basically these keywords pull from the job description, and again, you never want to be dishonest on your resume, and you should never apply for jobs that you're not qualified for. That's just going to get you in a world of mess either way. But when it comes down to the keywords, feel free to utilize words from the organization, from the job description, because those are the things, again, if you're applying for a role, say, when a new CEO role opens up, it's not just any role, like a CEO role or just a middle manager role or whatever it might be in any organization, sometimes there's hundreds of applicants. And so they use these keyword and software and technologies to pull out the top applicants and then have HR or hiring managers look at those. And so again, while we're spending a good amount of time here, the past 7 minutes talking about resumes and all these tips, generally, hiring managers spend about 6 to 7 seconds looking at your resume. So 6 to 7 seconds looking at that top third portion to make it kind of a yes or no. Now, that's that initial look. That's not necessarily total from start to finish of them the first time they're looking at it to when you're getting hired. But that goes to show you how many, and again, it's also dependent if it's a small organization or you want to come work for Graffiti Park, I promise we'll spend some more time looking at your resume. But it's obviously dependent. If it's a large organization with hundreds of people, hundreds of applicants, then that makes sense, right? But if it's a smaller organization, then again, this doesn't go for everyone. I don't want to generalize. But if that is the case, and there are many good large organizations to be applying for or to want to get some experience at, and you find yourself in that position, just remember that as you're putting together that top third portion of your resume and what you want to include. Again, that comes down to, is your experience better than your education? That should be up there. Or vice versa. What kind of skills can you put in on the side? How are you going to structure your resume, right? So there's a lot of ways that you can, and while this might seem kind of negative, there's a lot of ways that you can play to that and say, well, how can I catch their eye? How can I make myself stand out in that quick amount of time using the tools that I have at my disposal? So that's the resume side of things. Always, I think, whether you're working for yourself, or you're looking to, or you love your job right now, whatever it is, I always recommend having an updated resume. You never know what opportunity may come along. You never know what golden unicorn egg might come in your lap, and it's some person wants to fund your dream, right? And they just want to see what you've done and what you can do and what you have to stand for. And so it's also good just to have. Now, the one thing, and we'll touch on it later, is we live in the 21st century, so anything that you have resume-wise, physical, there's probably a way to have a digital version of that. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Beforehand, being that we are in the art community, I want to touch on portfolios. The fun thing about portfolios is there's a whole lot less fugazi you got to worry about when it comes to portfolios. Hopefully there's not software technology analyzing your art, making decisions at this point. And again, there's a time and a place for everything, but when it comes to art, and especially for your own personal portfolio, here's just some tips to kind of, if you've never put one together, or you just have your stack of black books at home, and that's been your portfolio, that's awesome too. Here's a way to maybe curate a little bit more of that. And so first and foremost, generally, what is a portfolio? It's an opportunity to highlight your strengths, work that you want to highlight, that you're proud of. It may not be your best work, it may be your best work. But just something that you want to showcase that you're proud of that highlights your abilities. And it can be, the one thing I don't have on here is it can really be, you want it to have a decent amount of work in there, but it can be any size you really want it to be. If it's like your total portfolio, then it has everything in there, that's obviously going to be massive over time, right? Depending on how much you produce. But if you want to have just a good handful of work that shows a variety of techniques or styles or what's the medium that you, whether it's spray paint or acrylic paint or whatever it might be, and the range, right? So your capacity to create. So is your portfolio just canvases? Is it just pencil drawings, paintings? Does it go to massive murals, right? Totally up to what your portfolio is. How do you want, and maybe some things to think about if maybe your portfolio is one direction. Again, totally fine. Art is subjective, however, whatever area, whatever sandbox you want to play in, that's up to you. But when you're building your portfolio, it's good to have a good variety of work in there, as well as showcasing your range of your capacities. And then the last bullet point here is tailored when applicable. So if you just have your portfolio, that's totally fine. You don't really have to think about it. But if you're using your portfolio to apply for more work, so you're applying with the city of Las Vegas or Clark County or another artist all-call, where you have to showcase what you've been able to do and they're bidding on different artists to do it, I would recommend tailoring your portfolio to whatever the bid is calling for. So if they're calling for a desert scene, with that's really, not realism, but has just kind of some pop art characters in it, then I would include work in your portfolio that you have that fits that device. If they're looking for patterns or whatever it is, or lettering, then again, I would try to include, that's where the variety comes in. Yeah, you may want to include a variety of things, but not just one lettering and then a bunch of different landscapes if they're asking for a lettering mural in their roll call. So those are portfolios. And then I did want to put a note on here because sometimes things will ask for a CV. What is a CV? It is short for curriculum vitae, which is a Latin phrase, which is basically like your life's work. So you can think of a CV as kind of like a written summary. It's like a combination of your portfolio and resume together. So oftentimes it'll have some skills, it'll have maybe your education, certainly some experience, notable experience. Your CV, what makes it a little different when it is not synonymous with your resume, is listing out like your achievements, what you've been able to do, if you've been published, things of that nature. Again, think life's work. What have you been able to accomplish in your career capacity? Again, this might be if you're applying for a graduate degree or a certification and it's asking for something like this. There's plenty of templates, and again, with the template thing, customize it, make your own. But when it comes to cover letters, CVs, things like that, I would implore you to lean on the many people before us that have already written those things out. So there's plenty of those things. The last point I'll make before we get into questions is, as I mentioned earlier, the digital age. LinkedIn is pretty much the social network digital version of your resume. Again, even if you work for yourself, whatever industry you're in, LinkedIn is one of the, I'd say, most recommended place from a business perspective to engage in for social media. Obviously, there's these little micro videos across all these different platforms nowadays. LinkedIn, however, is a good way to engage. Another one that's slept on, that's not up here, is Pinterest. So that's another really slept on social media where your content has a life cycle that is longer than any of the other social media platforms that you see up here. So that's another opportunity to showcase some things and maybe have a link to your portfolio page. Utilizing social media to your advantage, having links to a digital portfolio, having links to your digital CV on your personal or your professional page more than likely. If you do have a professional or a personal and professional page, understand the difference, use common sense. If you're marketing yourself as a business and you're trying to do work, or you're marketing yourself as someone that's trying to get a job, recognize what content you have on there or engage with on there, how that may impact your employability or capacity to get hired to do certain jobs. Again, if you do get picked out of the stack for a resume, I bet the first place they're going to look next is your LinkedIn or look for you on social media. A big power move that's slept on is putting your social media handles on your resume. It's like how, like, hey, I'm so confident in myself and my ability to portray your company and company's ideals that I'm willing to put my social media on there, right? In this day and age where that's synonymous with your opinion and maybe might be controversial, that could be a power move, putting your social media on your resume. And that is what I got. Happy to answer any questions.
Why Pinterest?
So that's a good question. So it has to do with the life cycle of content. So, and one of the first factor is just the sheer amount of people. So there's less users on Pinterest, or less users putting content on Pinterest, I should say. So there's just a bunch of content on Instagram and TikTok and Facebook and Twitter, right? It's flooded. And so while your post, I don't know the exact number, so I don't want to quote it, but for example, your post may last like a few hours on Instagram, right, on the feed.
Because of million posts.
Right, and it may last a few hours on, few minutes on, like an hour on TikTok, a few hours on Instagram, maybe a couple days on Twitter. It'll last a few months on Pinterest.
Because there's less people.
Yeah, and just Pinterest, less people, in the way that Pinterest algorithms work, it's not geared that, and again, I may be, if you're a developer, don't at me on this, and but the way I understand it is algorithms on other social media apps are meant to show you more and more content that's just like based off of whatever you've looked at. Whereas Pinterest, it's going to show you content based off whatever you've searched for, not necessarily whatever you're just, looking at or engaging with. So your boards are curated to specifically what you're looking for. And anecdotally, like personally speaking, I'll see pins on Pinterest I've seen years ago. And I know many people that are like that, right? Versus like on Instagram, you might see a viral video that you saw years ago, but rarely do you see the same content over and over, right? That's a good question.
What is the best way to make bullet points on your resume sound professional?
Right click synonyms. Search on. Don't be afraid of synonyms when you're looking for. So look up like verbs, like action verbs, and then you'll see like delivered, organized, things like that. And then so the first step would be like, what did you actually do? Like brainstorm what did you actually do and what do you want to showcase? Like, okay, well, like I was in charge of this or whatever. So manage team to do whatever. Okay, and then I built out the different departments or whatever. And it's like develop department, whatever, right? So I would start with an exercise of kind of like, what did you do? And then go into the like look for verbs that help articulate that. And then don't be afraid of synonyms as well. But also don't use words that like, if an employer is interviewing you and like pulls a fast one on you and asks and uses a word or something that you put in your resume, because I have seen that done before, then just don't use words that you wouldn't use in normal talk necessarily, but also like spice it up. Don't deliver everything.
Are there things that you should keep off of your resume but bring up in?
Yeah, I mean, just again, common sense wise, like I wouldn't put like your first job on your, like I would keep your experience relevant, so you don't feel like you have to put everything on your job or on your resume, every job you've had, whatever. Like I used to spin signs for Quiznos subs. That's not on my resume. Great job though. But so that is as an example of something I leave off my resume. But if I were applying for a job at Quiznos, that would probably be relevant. If I was applying for like a management or a training job or something like that, that might be fun or relevant to kind of put on as just anyways. But yeah, like you don't have to put like your high school or first jobs on there if that doesn't make sense. Your education, you don't have to put your high school education on there again, unless you're in college and you're still acquiring that. I would put any certifications that you have outside of any degrees on your resume. I would leave any accomplishments or like certificates off of that. You don't need to necessarily put like, unless you were like Sigma Cum Laude or something like that, obviously, like if you graduated with honors, put that on your resume. Your GPA after, I think it's like 4 years after you graduate, or 3 or 4 years, or after like an actual job if you go to college, and you don't have to go to college. If you do, that's awesome. If not, that's awesome too. Either way, work hard. Yeah, you don't have to include your college GPA. A lot of people leave that on for too long. You don't have to do that after you've graduated for a few years. And also don't do that if you don't have a good GPA in general, unless they ask. So, but yeah, that's a good question.
Should my resume be printed on any old piece of paper, or should I do anything special with it?
Yeah, so definitely have printed copies of your resumes. Step one, have a digital PDF copy, have a Word copy for you. Never share a Word copy of any document unless you're working on that with someone. Share PDF copies, that elevates you a little bit. Debt to Google Sheets and all that, like that's awesome if you need to use that for now, but in a professional environment, unfortunately, those don't really fly, unless you know how to weasel that in there. Anyways, PDF, when you do print it out, print it on good paper. Again, that'll make you stand out. It's good, same thing with like kind of like a business card. If you can go a little bit extra there on making it the texture better or double-sided or whatever, same thing with your resume. Resume should be 1 page. Don't max out those margins. Again, use that white space. Recognize they're going to be quick glancing on it. Don't saturate the eye space. Use a conservative font. Doesn't have to be Times New Roman. Can be some Arial. Yeah, I would have like a folder or like a leather padfolio. That's kind of if you're in pursuit of a job, or if that's something that like that is your job right now, it's getting your next job. More power to you. I would definitely have like a folder, whether it's plastic, whatever, or a padfolio where you have copies of your resume, business cards, in your car, truck, whatever, always on you. And like have a saved or email yourself a PDF copy of these things. So even if like you're out and you don't have your laptop or whatever and you need to send someone, you can just quickly like say you have that on your phone and you can forward that.
Do you know how like TikTok, they have things like for like 80 basically like very short video snippets? Do you recommend like a quick 25-second digital resume, like real snippets of like achievements and everything all in a nutshell? Like, you think that is too much as far as like if anyone were to try to that, you know?
That's a good question. I think anything that sets you apart is awesome. So I definitely think depending on your industry and like what you're trying to showcase with your resume or portfolio, right? I think in the art industry, that's certainly like applicable because there's like, you know, plenty of videos and murals and cool things that you can do. If I were thinking about some of my collection of work that I've done in some of my other jobs, that would not be an exciting video. There'd be like spreadsheets and you know PDFs and PowerPoints and whatnot. But certainly if you have like, you know, projects that you can showcase, or mural or a trade or skills that you want to like be able to show. Maybe you're a carpenter or something like that, right? And a resume doesn't really articulate. Maybe a portfolio is probably more applicable. But yeah, I think a digital or virtual way to be able to, then just don't use words that you wouldn't use in normal talk necessarily, but also like spice it up. Don't deliver everything, you know.
Are there things that you should keep off of your resume but bring up in?
Yeah, I mean, just again, common sense wise, like I wouldn't put like your first job on your, like I would keep your experience relevant, so you don't feel like you have to put everything on your job or on your resume, every job you've had, whatever. Like I used to spin signs for Quiznos subs. That's not on my resume. Great job though. But so that is as an example of something I leave off my resume. But if I were applying for a job at Quiznos, that would probably be relevant. If I was applying for like a management or a training job or something like that, that might be fun or relevant to kind of put on as just anyways. But yeah, like you don't have to put like your high school or first jobs on there if that doesn't make sense. Your education, you don't have to put your high school education on there, again, unless you're in college and you're still acquiring that. I would put any certifications that you have outside of any degrees on your resume. I would leave any accomplishments or like certificates off of that. You don't need to necessarily put like, unless you were like Sigma Cum Laude or something like that, obviously, like if you graduated with honors, put that on your resume. Your GPA after, I think it's like 4 years after you graduate, or 3-4 years, or after like an actual job if you go to college. And you don't have to go to college. If you do, that's awesome. If not, that's awesome too. Either way, work hard. Yeah, you don't have to include your college GPA. A lot of people will leave that on for too long. You don't have to do that. To showcase that, I think companies are evolving. And so whatever way that you can meet that evolving need while also making yourself stand out. So I wouldn't stray away from that. I wouldn't attach it if just to any like random company. I would like maybe have like a link to, or your website on your resume. Maybe that's on your website.
I get what you're saying.
You know what I'm saying? And so, you know, if they get there, they're already seeing it. That just makes it that much more visual, or they can visualize what you can actually do. But that's a dope idea, man. Being able to put a slide deck or like a quick short or TikTok together with some cool music, or collaborating with an artist with the music and putting your stuff on there, 100%. We try to keep a portfolio of Graffiti Park of like every project we've done, like with, you know, a screenshot of kind of what a mural from that project, how many artists were involved, how many murals we did, where the project was. We try to keep that running, and then we also have one where it's kind of like some of our most proud work, or shows a variety, like here's stuff we've done really that's up high where we needed a boom lift, here's stuff we've done on stairs, here's namesakes we've done, right? So this is straight out of advice that we've taken for ourselves as well. So thanks for the idea, man, on the virtual resume. What other questions can I answer?
That's it.
All righty. Thank you, friends.